Hey there, dancers, and welcome back to Twin Talks Ballet, your place on the internet to come get support in learning how to be the best dancer you can possibly be and flourish in your career from the inside out. So my name is Kirsten. If you're brand new, welcome. If you are not new, then you might have remembered that in a few videos ago, I mentioned that I happen to have one of the best performances or run of performances of my life, despite being quite out of shape and it being the first time in 2 years that I'm performing on stage doing classical ballet. That's crazy. I told you guys that I wanted to make a video sharing with you the breakdown of the mindset that I believe went into making this performance so good. And by the way, I did 4 performances over 2 weekends, and consistently I got pretty incredible results. Now, let me tell you why this is crazy to me. If you are anything like me, you have struggled to take what you're able to do in the studio and then replicate that quality of dancing on stage. I used to get extremely nervous. I honestly didn't really enjoy performing that much, despite really wanting to be a professional dancer and then becoming that. I've just always enjoyed the process of dancing so much that I love the day-to-day. I love classes, I love rehearsals, I love being with peers, and I like being in the theater, but honestly, performing would get really stressful for me because I had a lot of limiting beliefs about my ability to perform. I had had years of negative experiences proving to myself that every time I got on stage, I would make really weird mistakes, I would feel super out of my body, I would get so psyched out that I would start to forget choreography. Now, turns out, when I actually look back at videos of me performing, it was pretty good, but I felt so horrible about it, and I would just want it to be over. So I know that seems dramatic, but honestly, that was my experience quite a bit. And though I definitely learned to cope with this and get better at performing, as that was my work, it still wasn't easy for me. And so to tell you that those last 4 performances I had were ones in which I felt completely energetic, joyful, excited to be on stage. I was excited to go perform. I felt totally relaxed. I remembered every single detail that I wanted to add to my dancing. Of course, I remembered the choreography. I kind of admitted in a somewhat embarrassing way that, or I insinuated that I would forget choreography on stage. That's not what happened. I would just get really psyched out and doubt if I was doing things right while I was doing it. I also used to have a bunch of inner dialogue going on while I was dancing, to where I would make one little mistake in the past and then I would get so psyched out about it that I couldn't let it go and perform well the rest of the time. I would be thinking about how I was just well, screw it, I messed up, and I couldn't stop thinking about that. But this time, even if I had a little fumble where I maybe didn't roll off of my point shoes super well, maybe I kind of flopped down just a little bit, wasn't that bad, I would just be able to move on and almost forget that even happened. And I noticed that throughout these last 4 performances, I got more energetic as the performance went on, and it was just absolutely incredible to me that I found myself being one of those dancers I always looked up to. I literally used to never be able to understand how dancers could be good in the studio, but then they would get on stage and they would balance longer. They would just light up and just become this different kind of dancer where they're adding more details and dynamics and more excitement and artistry to their performance, and maybe doing an extra pirouette or something like that. I could never understand how people did that. And now I feel after I've taken time to reflect on what I did differently to make that show, those series of shows, so good for me, I think I definitely have some tips to share that I really want to give to you, so that hopefully, even if you don't struggle that much with performing well, I believe that these will really give you the tools to consistently perform your best on stage and enjoy the process while you're out there. So really, the biggest thing that changed for me is my mindset around performing. That is probably 90% of what changed. Other than that, I'm going to share with you the other 10% of just some ways that I physically prepared for their performance. And I was very intentional about this, especially because I was not so in shape. You know, like I said, it was my first time on stage doing classical ballet in pointe shoes in 2 years. And also this whole fall, like I took a lot of the summer off. I was very out of shape. I just started preparing again in August to be on stage in December, and I had really only been taking real classes once or twice a week. Another thing is I had taken a total of 5 weeks totally off during the fall semester leading up to the show because of work trips. I was a little nervous, but I was shocked that when I put more intentionality into the way I was mentally framing the whole performance, I was able to dance like I could not imagine. So here are the mindset shifts that I made to make this performance so successful. Number one, I changed my standard for what a good performance is. I took the focus off of myself and trying to prove things to myself and please myself and feel good for myself, and I put almost all of that focus on the audience. No longer was I trying to prove to myself that I was great by having great technique and not making any mistakes. I also used to tell myself that I was under pressure and I was trying to prove myself to others, like my artistic director, or it used to be my professors or my teachers. But really the whole time, I was trying to prove to myself that I was good. And even if I had a good performance, I would beat myself up for not feeling like I was having fun on stage. And so really when I broke it down, I used to only make performing about me. And what I did for this performance is I took that intention to prove anything to myself or fill up myself in some way, and I just put the focus on serving the audience. And you can take this structure of what I did and apply it in a way that's meaningful to you. So first, to share a bit of contrast, I used to have such a high standard for what I needed to do to prove to myself that my show was good. I had so many conditions, like I had to feel good about my technique. I had to enjoy myself. I had to, talk to some people I knew after the show and like gauge their facial expressions. Did they like it? Were they pleased? Did they enjoy the show? Did they think I was good? Like, I had so many checkpoints that I made it almost impossible to feel good about what I did. This time I switched that intention and just simply made it about one thing: feeling joy and excitement for what I was doing and sharing that with the audience, so that I was no longer a dancer that was trying to be great in my own right. I was a facilitator of a fun, memorable experience for the audience. And when I thought of myself as a facilitator of fun, enjoyment, memorable times, the holiday spirit, because it was Nutcracker, I knew I could deliver. And so it took out of my mind all these doubts I had, like, oh, what if my shoe is dead and my technique doesn't feel that good? Like, what if I kind of bounce out of a pirouette? Like, instead, this time I'm like, so what? What if? I know that if I just focus on sharing joy, then I can kind of trip out of a pirouette and just smile a little bigger and just include the audience in on what I'm feeling when I dance, and just invite them into this experience where we're all sharing this collective energy that is so amazing. Another layer to this is I thought of myself as being a part of facilitating this experience. Instead of putting all this weight on my shoulders to make the audience have a good time, thinking of myself as a facilitator, and in fact a co-facilitator, also caused me to remember that I'm not alone on stage. Like, even if I was actually the only one on stage for a moment, I knew that the quarter ballet and Waltz of the Flowers, they were going to come back on, and we are working as a team to just share the joy of dance. Watching dancing is incredibly inspirational to some people in order to just add more layers into like anchoring my mind into this mindset where it's really about facilitating an experience, I would think of elderly people in the audience and how this is probably extremely inspirational to them. I would think of the little kids who have never seen ballet before. They're probably imagining themselves becoming like us one day. I was adding all these layers to my imagination around like what I was able to do through my dancing. And all that didn't come through just having perfect technique. The technique itself wasn't what would deliver that feeling, but the technique is rather like a canvas for me to present that emotional experience for everyone. And I want to emphasize that this new intention is extremely achievable. No longer was I worrying like, would I be able to approve of my own performance technically? I was going in there really confident because I had set a very achievable goal and intention for the performance. Like I knew I'd be able to deliver on that. And in fact, I was excited to do it. Number 2, I further deepened myself into this mindset by creating a metaphor around the kind of thing I wanted to embody. Instead of just seeing myself so literally, like I'm just a dancer and people care, like assuming that people just care so much about my technique and my perfection. Instead of just making it about me, I thought of kind of a character I want to play. And yeah, I was playing a character already. I was Dewdrop and Waltz of the Flowers, and I mean, there's not really a story around that, but maybe that's what afforded me this experience of creating my own story of what I was really doing on stage. The first thing I thought is, okay, what is an example of a person who leads people into having a nice time? And the first thing I thought is someone in the hospitality industry. Okay, so what's an example of someone facilitating a nice time in the hospitality industry? And to me, I thought of a server at a nice restaurant. I've had many experiences where, I go for the food, but then suddenly because the server just went above and beyond in saying like, I'm going to take care of you guys tonight, you're going to have a great time. Maybe they send some free things to the table. I've had plenty of servers like that just make the evening so memorable, and I end up not even really caring about the food, or even mediocre food ends up tasting better to me just because they made an experience for us. So having that very distinct image of like, oh, that's an example of a person I want to be like. I had that metaphor in my head as I was going into the theater while I was dancing, while I was in the wings. And that just helped to further paint that picture of like, okay, this is what I'm doing here. And by taking the pressure off of my technique so much to deliver that experience, I was actually able to have really good control over my body, like very good technique considering the circumstances, and like I was able to consistently physically deliver a good performance while also feeling like this really strong connection with the audience that built my energy as I went on. And that's not a normal experience. Before I kind of came up with this trick, I used to, like I said, have so many racing thoughts in my head. And instead, this time, I was just completely in the experience, in the moment, dancing and like feeling that energy of that connection with the audience and this purpose for what I was doing there. The third thing I did is I prepared my mind as much as I possibly could to get familiar again with the experience of performing. Now, a lot of us think that the only way to do this is to just perform a lot. But what happens if you're like me and you haven't been on stage in forever, especially in pointe shoes and a classical ballet costume? This was no longer a familiar experience to me. You should watch my video on 3 tips to overcome performance anxiety, because if you watch that, I basically did all the tips in there. Specifically, I did some visualizations I'll share with you, and I also did some time techniques to actually remove some negative emotions from the past that I had associated with performing. In a nutshell, time techniques allow you to visualize a significant emotional experience from your past and kind of distort that visualization in very strategic ways. I lead people clients do this all the time. And you do this to distort your emotional connection to that event and release negative emotions from it, and then insert the feeling that you've learned from it so that you can let go of that negative emotional trigger or the negative beliefs you might have picked up in that significant emotional event. When I did this for myself, it really allowed me to have a clear slate with performing again. So I felt like this is just a new experience, you know, I know how to do it. I technically have experience with it, but I no longer had this negative emotional baggage where I was thinking of that time in the past where I really screwed up on stage, in my opinion, and like, oh my gosh, what if that happens again? That wasn't really in my head. I was just like, oh, I can do this. Let's go see what happens. In some other visualizations I did, I would do exactly as I described in that video, which I'll link down below and in the cards. What I did is I would turn on the Waltz of the Flowers music, which I was going to dance to, and I would close my eyes and just visualize the whole dance. And I would visualize myself on stage, and I would visualize it looking through my own eyes instead of looking at myself dancing. Then at the end of that visualization, I would kind of step out of my body perceptually and then look at myself dancing. And I explain why that is in the video, so you should go watch it. But I did this and it really made me feel so like familiar and just normal with getting on stage again once I finally got into the theater. Here is another critical step that I absolutely recommend to everyone who performs. Rehearse things going wrong. And even when you don't disorient yourself or kind of mess up kind of on purpose or give yourself an unideal scenario to be performing in, even if you don't make mistakes on purpose and you're like, oh, I made mistakes, like what if I do that on stage? If that happens in rehearsal, treat it like, oh, I rehearsed making a mistake I would normally be afraid of making. And then when you make a mistake, train yourself to cover it really well. And instead of making yourself so fearful of making mistakes, take those mistakes as learning opportunities to prove to yourself that you know how to keep going and keep performing, so that you really know, no matter what, you've got an exit strategy or a plan of action if something does go wrong, so that when you are ready to perform, you know how to keep the performance going so that that one turn that doesn't go right, like if that happens, it doesn't define your performance. I think so many of us get so freaked out, like, oh, what if this happens? What if this happens? And we imagine, I used to imagine myself like walking off stage in shame, which I would never do, but I would just kind of leave my mind after the what if questions and like try to just think of something else instead of answering the what if question. Like, what if I fall out of the soutenu? I'll plie a little deeper before my next releve. That's what I'll do. I started answering those questions and rehearsing the answers to those questions, so I wasn't so scared of making mistakes. They're not so high stakes anymore. That's what I would do in rehearsals with the rest of the company or the studio. Here's the other thing I did. I would go into a studio by myself and rehearse on purpose with either shoes that were a little too hard for comfort or too soft. And then I would switch directions, facing the mirror, and then I would face the back or the side. I would like intentionally make the experience of rehearsing kind of new and uncomfortable for me. And I would make the run not about being perfect, but about learning to adapt and getting comfortable with the uncomfortable. I would also run things when I was slightly like not as warm as I wanted to be, and then when I was too tired. I rehearsed most of the possible scenarios of things going wrong so that I would be more comfortable and less afraid. Like if something went wrong, I knew I could handle it. So much of fear just comes with the unknown, and when you make the unknowns known, a lot of the fear will just go away. When I got into the theater, the way I performed to get comfortable with being on stage, or what I did to get comfortable, is during warm-up class, I would just really focus on finding my balance in the space. And it would be okay if I was kind of off my leg. I would experiment to see, like, do I need to get my weight further forward? Do I need to just feel more grounded? I would figure out like what I needed to do to like really get acquainted with the new space. I would practice like really projecting to the back row, or you know, just using my eye line in different ways. So I would get used to that different experience of depth perception. That used to throw me off a lot. The other thing is when I was in the wings about to go on stage, I would, you know, I would stay out of the way, but as much as I could, I would spend time in the wings looking at as much of the stage as I could without being seen. And before I would go on stage, I would have already been there for at least one or two numbers looking, well, you know, if it was allowed. I know some companies and some schools, they're like, you cannot be in the wing until the number before you go on. You can still do this tip if you have 30 seconds instead of just fixating on being warm and like moving your body and like looking at your shoes. I would be still and I would look at the stage so that I could feel as if I were already on stage. I would imagine myself being out there. I'd imagine myself looking at the audience, you know, in the dark. And so that when I got on stage, I stepped on stage, it wasn't so jarring. I was like, I've already been here. Number 4, the last kind of segment of what I did to prepare was preparing physically. And specifically what I aimed to do was several weeks before the show, or even months, I was experimenting to figure out what is the best, most efficient warm-up routine for this quality of performance. You know, if I was doing like an entire piece that had a bunch of petit allegro, my warm-up routine would have been different. But the point is, I considered what kind of movements I was going to be doing in this piece, and I formed kind of the perfect warm-up routine around preparing myself for that. Notice I said I wanted to be efficient, because what I've discovered over the years is that I used to just have an approach where I just needed to stretch, I just needed to get loose. And then when I got older, I kind of overcompensated and I would over warm up so that I was actually kind of tired before I was going to go perform. This time, my focus was on doing only what I needed to do to be prepared while reserving my energy for the stage. So for me, I focused on what are the foundational movements and muscle groups I need to warm up and get comfortable with. And if I'm comfortable with those foundational movements, I know that those will be kind of build the foundation for everything else I do on stage. So the first thing I needed to get was a strong releve on one leg. So what I did is I would just do 8 slow spring releves onto point in a mazurka rhythm. 1 and 2, 3, 2 and 2, 3, ba ba da ba. I don't think that's a perfect mazurka rhythm. Forgive me if I'm a little rusty with my musicality. The other thing is I wanted to practice shifting my weight onto point in a piqué and then rolling through, pushing my weight forward. I find that it's extremely important to practice bringing all of my weight forward as much as possible, because that is really what you need when you're going to go on stage. Because typically when people get nervous or they see all the lights, you're going to go back. And when you're back, that's when you fall off a point. That's when your pirouettes don't work. That's when you can't keep your balance. And that's when you look really stiff. So what I did is I would do as many slow walks on point, rolling through my shoes, transferring my weight forward. I would do as many as I could before I ran out of room. The other thing I would do is just a few développés on point and on flat in all seconde. And why I would do this is I had a lot of battement développés in all seconde in the piece, whether I was doing it through a piqué or a releve. I had lots of those, and in order to feel solid on stage, I would really need to warm up the sides of my body. So I would do that by first actually doing some side planks, and I would do développés all seconde and just kind of hold it for a few counts on point and on flat, just to get my body kind of solid in that position. The other thing I would really need to do is warm up the front of my body, so my abdominals. And I would do that, of course, to be able to get my weight forward and to feel more in control. And I would do that by just kind of going into a plank position and pulling my knees one at a time into my chest, kind of slowly. And I would only do 8 of these, nothing major, but just to kind of wake up those ab muscles. And I think those are also called mountain climbers. I also really needed to feel on my leg, not only in the releve position, but throughout the entire process of going from releve to plie, and even just standing on flat on my leg. So what I did, aside from just the relevés on point, is I would stay on flat with my back leg in coup de pied derrière, and without the bar or anything, I would just do a really slow plie, 2, 3, stretch, 2, 3. And I would do this at least 4 to 8 times on each leg before I felt really like my glutes were warmed up, the muscles that rotate my legs, they're warmed up, and I'm really like pulled up. Then I would just warm up my ankles a little bit. There were a few light jumps in the piece, so I would do about 8 changements and then maybe 8 sautés, switching leg from coup de pied to coup de pied. If you are like me, and oftentimes for some reason you're always like in the last dance and it's been like 2 hours since warm up, I dealt with that a lot in my career too. What I would do is I found it really important to just like every 10 minutes get up and just do a couple movements, maybe just some bends, some squats, whatever I needed to do, just keep a little bit loose, move around, do those slow plies on one leg, whatever I needed to do. It was so much better for me if I kept moving every 10 to 15 minutes instead of letting myself get really cold and really stiff, and then I would have to use a lot more energy warming myself up all over again. So I would just keep moving. I would also do that routine that I described to you, 2, 3, or 4 dances before I went on, depending on the length of the pieces before me. Because at least 1 or 2 dances before I went on, I wanted to be calm still and like collecting my energy, breathing really easily, so that I had all the energy to pour out on stage. In summary, those are really all my tips, everything I did, and it was actually extremely easy to do all this. So I would really recommend taking notes on this video, watching it again, keeping it with you as you either prepare to audition or perform, and just make necessary tweaks for yourself to prepare yourself best for your piece that you'll be doing. Just to summarize, I shifted my mindset by shifting my intention for what made a good performance. The next thing I did is I practiced making mistakes. And lastly, I prepared physically by creating a routine that was efficient and getting me warmed up without making me tired. So you guys, I really hope that you've enjoyed this video. I really hope that you'll take some things I shared and try them out for yourselves. And please let me know down below, which one of these tips do you want to implement for yourself? And what are some tips that really work for you that maybe I hadn't mentioned? I would legitimately love to see you guys sharing in the comments. Maybe I love to learn some things from you, and I'm sure other dancers would as well. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.